I'm trying to record with my iPad instead of my phone, and this is going to be really hard because the camera is in the wrong place. The camera is here, it's not. What comes after NaNoWriMo? When I ask that question, your initial thought might be editing, because that's typically what we do after we finish a manuscript. And completing a manuscript in November is the whole point of NaNoWriMo. But this time I kind of mean the question on a bigger scale. What will people do as they start to abandon what seems to be a sinking ship? If you've been writing for a while, you're probably familiar with the concept of NaNoWriMo, if not the organization itself. The organization holds an event in November every year and a couple smaller events through the rest of the year, and the goal is to write a 50,000-word manuscript from beginning to end in the month of November, which is honestly not a great month to be trying to do that considering how busy November is. But at this point, it's no secret that as an organization, NaNoWriMo has had a few blunders lately. Both this year and last, some poorly managed situations, statements, and stances have led to a shrinkage of authors actively participating in the NaNoWriMo event. And as they depart, donations to the organization shrink. As a nonprofit, their tax records are all public, so we already know that 2022 was a pretty big loss for the organization. And while the years before 2022 were always very up and down, a couple of things that they have said recently have led to sponsors of the organization actually pulling out their support. So it's not looking great for Nano. At this point, the trouble has even been covered by news outlets like Washington Post and Wired, which are not small organizations. I have my own thoughts on their choices and their stances and the way they have handled things, but ultimately what I think is not really relevant to the question I'm asking, so I'll try to stay focused on that. A lot of authors are abandoning the NaNoWriMo organization. Where are they going to go? So I did a quick Google search for NaNoWriMo alternatives, and I got so many options that after a few minutes of trying to write down some that sounded interesting, I started to get overwhelmed with the abundance of choices. And because of that feeling, what's actually going to happen in the wake of NaNoWriMo is pretty clear. The first time I participated in NaNoWriMo, I was 16. I did not win, but the website was very bare bones. It was basically just a community hub for people to get together. There were none of the fancy word trackers or anything like that. The whole concept of NaNoWriMo then was still a pretty simple thing. Just get together with some friends, try to write a 50,000-word book in the month of November, and see how far you get. Because having somebody to check in with can be really motivating. I think that's part of what helped NaNoWriMo become so successful in the first place, was because when you are accountable to other writers for your creativity, it starts building a sense of community. So a community grew around the event, and the website grew with the community. Ultimately, I think that is the most important part, and as people start to slip away from the organization, they're going to find community elsewhere. There's no shortage of websites that's ready to scoop up the people who are leaving the official event, but most of the people I see leaving NaNoWriMo as an organization are going into private spaces. So far this month, I've been invited to about a dozen different private Discord servers and group chats that are supposed to be dedicated to NaNoWriMo, but in an unofficial capacity. Just kind of doing it on their own away from the website, but it's still happening in November. A lot of my friends are setting up their own spreadsheets. Some of them are making their own websites for tracking. Others are just reporting in Discord servers and groups, and others are moving to word count sites like Pacemaker, which I always liked better than NaNoWriMo anyway, because you can use it anytime and not just during Nano or Camp Nano. Really, I think that's the biggest benefit to this, is that as people begin to splinter away and form their own little groups, it's going to be more tailored to what each individual group can do and when. And because of that, I think it's going to really foster a much closer community than what Nano ultimately was doing in the past few years. I think being able to do a challenge any time of the year is going to be a lot better for fostering closeness among writers. And ultimately, that independence that the groups are forming is my prediction of how things are going to go. Honestly, NaNoWriMo never really did anything for me as a community builder. I never made any friends from doing it. I never made any friends on their website. There were never any kind of meetups or events for the different chapters anywhere near my area. So when I say I'm not going to be participating in NaNoWriMo this year, it doesn't really change things for me. I always did challenges kind of on my own, maybe alongside a few friends that I already knew, but overall I felt limited by their word count tracker. And as I become a faster writer and a more competent writer, being able to finish 50,000 words in a month becomes a little bit less intimidating. I mean, I basically just did that in 15 days at the end of August, so what challenge is there in doing it in 30 days in November? I'll be writing in November, of course. I'm going to be starting the last book in my epic fantasy series Spectrum Legacy, but I'll be working at a regular pace. I don't know how far I'm going to get, but I'll just get the book done when it gets done. So really I don't lose anything by logging out of my NaNoWriMo account and never going back. But I do think it's kind of sad. The very first NaNoWriMo was this little unofficial event held between friends in 1999, which means 2024 should have been the 25th anniversary. The organization has only existed since 2006, but before it was an organization, people were still doing it because it permeated online communities. So instead of having a silver anniversary, it kind of seems like a lot of writers are instead breaking up with the group. I still think there's value in trying to do a big community-oriented writing sprint like that, where it's like this long period of time where you are all pushing toward a uniform goal that everybody is doing all together. But I am interested to see where people start doing that and when the different events are going to happen. If you're a student, doing it in summer is probably more effective and efficient, but for a stay-at-home parent like me, it's really best for me to do it when school is in session because that's when I actually have time that I can sit down and write. And as I spend November working on the last book in Spectrum Legacy, I'm probably just going to make occasional status updates on social media, sharing my word counts, and updating people on how close the book is to being done, which is not really anything out of the ordinary for me. One of my friends is doing the challenge in her Discord server, kind of dialing it back to what Nano originally was when it was just groups of friends getting back together, and a member of her community created a really cool word tracking spreadsheet. I'm not really big on spreadsheets, but I really appreciate how it looks. And while I stick to my journal, I can see how something like that would be a really valuable community resource for people in a small group like that. But if you've decided to just continue to use the NaNoWriMo organization's website, I mean, that's up to you. I don't particularly care what anybody else does. I just don't feel like the group is ultimately a good fit for me personally anymore, so that's why I'm kind of drifting away. I think I would like to do a community event at some point, but I don't know where I would go. If you have a good alternative, please drop it in the comments so I can check it out. I would love to hear your thoughts, and if you think I'm right in my assessment that ultimately people are going to be splintering back into really small writing groups again. It's almost the end of October though, and I have a book that I need to start outlining, so I'm gonna go. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.